good morning, and welcome back to another episode of the Red Chip Poker Podcast. I'm your host, James Splitsuit Sweeney, joined by Chris Warren. Chris, I want to talk about a little GTO hack that you've been working on and shared with me earlier, and I thought it was really, really good. So you want to kind of jump right into it and have some fun with us?
Absolutely. So
perfect.
One of the things that we've been thinking about is that, it's so challenging to understand and conceptualize GTO, right? And, just one of the things that we've been talking about in the Discord and going over hands is just like, what is the GTO line? Because I think it's really helpful just to kind of know where that is. That's, my approach. I know not everyone approaches poker that way. And one of the things that came up is just, people would post their hands and I would kind of give my hot take on it, because there's a lot of hands. So, it's good value. If you want to jump in right now, you're getting a lot of personalized Chris analysis on your poker hands. But anyways, one of the things I just would notice is that say, I think we need to be bluffing here 25 to 30% with this hand. And then, maybe we'd get more into it. We'd run the solver later. And lo and behold, we'd find out about 25, 30% with that hand. And this was kind of happening again and again. And I was like, I wonder why I have such a good feel for this. Because it's not like I've studied GTO and I have a sense of what these situations are going to be like, but I'm dealing with a lot of textures I don't know. I shouldn't be that close. And then I just realized that there's a direct connection between how you would balance a pre-flop GTO range, or just a pre-flop range in general, for strength and with enough bluffs, etc., and a post-flop range. I think there's almost like a direct analogy in terms of relative to the bet size, what quantity of bluffs and stuff you want in the range, etc. And I realized, when we're talking about pre-flop, I have a very good feel for what is a nitty strategy, or kind of how to balance out my range. It's just a feel. It's a heuristic, I think, that I've developed over time. And I think that applies directly to post-flop. And so that's, I think, what you kind of liked about it.
Very much so. So can you give a clear example where this is applying? Because like you said, you're getting a whole bunch of kind of different and atypical textures when we're going through the Red Chip Discord and looking at hands, and it's not going to be all spots that you've analyzed one-to-one in a solver before. So clearly, if you're getting close regularly, something is happening here. So could you give an example of kind of what you've seen through this kind of stuff and how you might be getting to that estimation so quickly?
Yeah, I think the best way to think about it is if we have kind of range, what are ranges that people play poker with? They either have a range that's too tight, they're a nit. They have a range that's too wide, and they're over aggressive or overly loose or whatever. And then you have your balanced, powerful range that's unexploitable. And when we're balancing ranges, it pretty much will always end up the same, relative to the bet sizes. It's you're going to want, imagine an under the gun opening raise range in 6 max, right? You want probably Jack 10 suited plus, Ace 9 suited, Ace 8 suited approximately, probably about Ace Queen off, King Queen off, Ace Jack off, or kind of borderline, maybe some of those combos, etc. And I think it's approximately 6s, 7s plus. Doesn't really, again, these exact fringes don't really matter. It's not stuff that I'm sweating. And then you might have one combination of, or one full combination of suited connectors with 6-5 suited, and probably an Ace-5 suited type of thing from under the gun 6 max. Right? That's about what it is. Yeah. And so I was just thinking, okay, well, which of those hands are we pretty happy to get calls with, right? Because that's kind of that's your value range, let's say. So, it's when I raise 10s, it's I'm pretty confident if someone calls me in any position. If I raise Ace Queen, same thing. Ace 5 suited, not really. I'd love for everyone to fold. I guess it works. It can work as a 4-bet, etc. But if you get 3-bet. But King Jack suited, maybe okay with a call. King Queen suited for sure, I think. And yeah, there's just kind of you just kind of know, when I get called with these hands, it goes really well post flop. I have a lot of extra playability, and then if I get called with these hands, it's I'll be fine, but even just having them fold would have been great.
Sure.
And because we play, because when you make pre-flop decisions, it's over and over again. It's how many times do we do our open raise range from the under the gun? We just do it all the time. And so you actually do get a really good feel of like, okay, like these are how these hands perform. This is what feels good. This is what doesn't. And this is I make adjustments to my range based on that as well. And because I'm able to develop that sense, I was like, oh, like I know what this range is like. I know what it feels like. I know where the strength is. I know where the weakness is. That also happens post flop. And when we go to post flop, for example, if we say 3-bet and the board comes, let's say ace 10 2 rainbow. It's like, well, what hands should you bluff with? It's like, you should probably bluff with your king queen, your king jack, etc. It's just really obvious, right? Like those are the hands that will have equity if called if there's no flush draw.
Right.
It's just like those are the best bluffs or whatever. And then I guess maybe if you had like 4 or 5 suited or something in your range. And it's just really easy. And then once you have that range, it's like, okay, so we have, X amount of Broadway cards from our pre-flop 3-bet range. Okay. And you can just say, how many bluffs do I need? Well, I need the amount of bluffs that's about that pre-flop ratio. You go back to what does that feel? And it's like, well, about 2/3 of it feels pretty good if someone continues against it. And, 1/3 of it, it's okay to just kind of be like really pure stealing, right? Maybe a little less, maybe 25% or whatever. But that's about what you're shooting for. So then it's just like combinatorially, it's like, okay, well, I have, so when I bet, I'm going to have ace king, I'm going to have ace jack, I'm going to have ace queen, probably going to have some ace 10, I'm going to have some pocket 10s, some pocket aces, and then I'll have a bunch of kings and queens and things like that like maybe I want to check, or maybe I'm going to bet small, and some of those will be bets. And then I'm going to have my king, queen jack, etc. Okay. So how many combos of those gut shots do I have? Do you have pure king, queen jack, etc. Anyways,
Right.
You just kind of visualize your range, right? And you're not going to be perfect in the moment. And at the end of the day, you can just say, well, do we really have enough bluffs here? It's a pretty good board. And it's like, you know what? I think I have so many value hands if I'm betting on this flop, especially if I'm betting small. I can probably just bet all my gut shots here, right? Like, sure. I'm not even sure I have enough. Maybe I need to bet non-gut shots. I'm not even sure we really have non-gut shots, but yeah, I guess we're just betting our whole range. And that's balanced. And I think if you put that in a solver, the solver will basically tell you the same thing, right? It'll be like, okay, you're just betting pure here. So I think tell me, are you coming along with me? Are you feeling how that's just like a natural, you can suss out there's not enough bluffs in that range, so you're betting range in that spot?
I can feel it out on such an obvious board. And I mean obvious because it's, very, very range advantage for the raiser in that situation. What about situations? Well, I guess we'll stick on this one for a moment because maybe it's different on ones where it's not as clear who has advantage there. So I understand how we're getting there, in terms of trying to make sure that we have, you say it constantly during the season, making sure that we have at least some bluffs in our range. And then in this exact situation, it's just like, well, okay, it's pretty darn good for us. And let's make sure we have quite a few bluffs. And yeah, let's maybe just throw the entire brick of bluffs in there. How do you elaborate just a little bit more for someone who's hearing that and like, okay, fine, maybe, but how are you getting there? Is it just because the range advantage is just so beneficial for the preflop raiser? What's going into this one?
Yeah, I think naturally I am counting combinations here, right? Because if we go through and we say king, queen, king, jack, queen, jack, right? That's all of our combinations of Broadway gut shots. And if we're only doing suited hands, which I think we pretty much would, I guess we could have king, queen off in a 3-bet range. It's 12 combos, right? 3 hands, all suited, 12 combos. That's what it is. And then we'll take our king queen. We have 12 combos there as well. So we have 24 combos, and then we just have all these combos of just betting the ace on the flop, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's just like, I guess if we have 24 combos and then we start counting out our ace combos, it's like we're gonna have 3 combos of aces. We're gonna have 3 times 4, 12 combos of ace king, 12 combos of ace queen, 12 combos of ace jack, 9 combos of ace 10, assuming we were 3-betting these pure. And yeah, so then we get to a ratio where it's like, okay, we're about 2/3, probably, 2/3 combinations on one side. And I am just feeling this out. Like, I didn't count this out beforehand. But then I know, okay, well, this is an advantageous board for the 3-better. So it's like, okay, if I'm a little over bluffy here, is that bad? No, it's not bad. And then I guess we have combinations of kings and queens and stuff. So maybe that brings it back down to about 75% value and 25% just pure bluff. And that's what we want, right? That's exactly what we were talking about. So, well, about 75% of your range you're going to feel real good about or decent about. And 25% you're kind of like, yeah, well, it's just the only way I'm winning is if people fold. And that's it. It's really just a combination thing. I know you go over counting and analyzing the math in your workbooks and things like that. But and I think you can get a feel for this just kind of practicing, going through the situation, the flop that you're on. But, naturally, like we can figure out about how many combinations there are on the fly.
So you made this a 3-bet pot, one where we have this range, we're looking at it, we 3-bet, they call. That's all well and good. So I get the 75% in that situation, and especially looking at the 3-betting range overall. Now, I could see a natural extension of that being like, okay, well, I guess on all boards, we should have, roughly the same density of our preflop value. So is that true, or is that an extension of the fact that we have the range advantage board that's clearly favoring us as the 3-better?
I do think it's pretty much always true, but it's always relevant to sort of our chosen bet size and strategy. So let's now flip the flop and say we have a 7-6-5 flop. It's one of our classic sort of good range for a caller, bad range for the 3-better.
Still 3-bet pot?
Let's keep it as a 3-bet pot, right? Okay. So we have, in this scenario, we're going to have more combinations of overpairs, but they'll have more combinations of like the sets and the 2 pairs than, 2 pairs. 2 pairs maybe be about even, but they'll probably have more 8-9 suited. They'll probably have more 5s for sure, etc. Anyways, so we get to that flop, and then we're like, okay, it's a strategy here. It totally changes the situation because now we have a lot less obvious value hands, right? Like we have 8s plus, or maybe we say we only 3-bet 9s plus or whatever. We have our overpairs, and that's about it, right? Maybe we have some 8-9 suited. Maybe we have a small percentage of like the pocket pair
or something. Yeah. Sure.
But honestly, if we're using like one of our recommended ranges, you probably wouldn't have any. So what happens in this situation is that you're just not going to be betting that much. Let's say we're out of position in this situation. You don't want to bet a lot. So you just have your range is just, 9s plus as your value bets. And honestly, like because this is such a good range for them, we're just going to take a check. We're going to take a check range here. Or we're going to check our 100% range here. And, then we're just check calling or okay, let's say we're in position, so that'll make it easier. So we're in position, the only hands we want to bet are overpairs for value. How many bluffs do we then need in that situation? Well, it's like, okay, so we have 9s plus, and we're going to have 6 combinations of each. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 36 combos. So how many bluffs do we need? Well, we need about 12 combos of bluffs. How about that? That's pretty easy. So then it's just like, you got to, pick a system how you're going to sort out what those are in the moment. For example, I would actually want to be checking back a lot of my ace, king, ace, queen with the flush draws, potentially because they have a nice showdown value and I don't want to really get check raised with them as much. And so we get to say, okay, well, we'll find like anything that's not like the strongest aces. We'll just have those flush draws and we'll bet those. So then we're like king, queen suited, queen, jack suited, king jack suited, ace 10 suited, ace jack suited, and then you can kind of see get down to 10-9 suited, 10 and whatever it is. We just count out 12 flush draws that we're going to bet. That's it. Check everything else. Done.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
That's not bad. All right.
I think starting with that value visualization is really easy. What are the strong hands? Because I think it's very easy to know. It's easier to figure out what are my strong hands, and they get a sense of how many combos there are.
Yeah.
And then you can go looking for your bluffs.
I like that a lot. I'm seeing what we're doing. So we're taking the preflop range that we have in this situation, the preflop range that we have getting to this flop, and then determining, okay, what are the value hands we're happy with, and then kind of reverse engineering the bluff combos based upon how many value combos we'll have in that scenario. Value combos just kind of being like, I know people always look for a hard and fast rule here, so I'll just kind of like prod you for a moment. Are we talking like top pair plus is pretty much we're happy with? Is a top pair second kicker plus? Like, what would you say is, if someone was looking for a hard and fast rule, and I know we hate those, but let's just say we had to give them something, kind of what would you deem as value?
I think people mostly can come up with a heuristic for it, because it's like, we all know, like, when we bet and someone calls and then we're nervous, it's like, that's when you're on the fringe.
Yeah.
So it's like, imagine our ace 10 2 rainbow board. You bet ace 5 and you get called. You don't feel great, right? You're like, I guess I could showdown on this hand, but they're not afraid of this ace high board. Like, I hope I have jack 10. And yeah, I think it's kind of like, most boards it is going to be around top pair, but it's very dependent, and it's very dependent upon the bet size we use. And in fact, I think this helps us figure out what the bet size will be. This is another way to reverse engineer that as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think most people can understand whether, it's like, obviously on the 7-6-5 board, I guess you could have ace 7 and be okay betting it, but even then it's like when you get called with a7 on that board, you're like, wow, there's tons of bad turns, and how good do I feel about this? It's like not that good. And yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't think there's necessarily a hard and fast rule, but I think once you're getting close and you don't feel great about calls, and you're not sure you want action, that's always the point where you're kind of leaving value territory.
So without going too micro and getting too detailed on it, you quickly ran through some of like the better bluff combos on the low mid connected board, and you were talking about how you'd kind of save some of like your ace king, ace queen suited for kind of maybe checkbacks, and then you take some of your other best bluff combinations from there and prioritizing kind of things that have over maybe 2 overcards plus backdoor flush draw.
I'm even skipping the backdoor flush draws on that board,
okay,
right? Because it's just like it's by visualizing, we can say, okay, we're gonna have maybe about 12 combination, maybe 14, 16 combos of like pure flush draw hands. Mm-hmm. So if we know we need 12, we actually don't have to bet our backdoor flush draw at all.
So you prioritize the non-backdoor flush draws for your flop bets?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Now we may ideally, right, we have totally defensible strategies that are like, when I check back the flop, I can still have some flushes on the turn. We figure that out exactly. Yep. That's a little advanced for what we're shooting for here. I think most people are going to benefit by getting to the point where they can have an appropriate amount of bluffs and just know what that is, and they have the appropriate amount of value. And, it's like, that's the most powerful thing. Like, it is great. It's just like pre-flop. It's like, it's so important to have the right pre-flop opening or percentage. Yep. It's not that important whether it's 7-6 suited or if it's ace 9 off. Doesn't matter, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to see if we can aim for, is some sort of simple heuristic where we are keeping the proper number of combos betting, and if we are just looking at kind of backdoor flush draws, it does actually kind of bank us into the correct frequency in terms of number of bluffing combos we need. But if you want to, that's where I think people are going to need some help. So, okay, we bank into an appropriate frequency, making sure we have enough bluffs in the density of our betting range. How are we prioritizing the combos from there? Because I know there are going to be some people that are like, okay, I need to bet something. Mine is like, okay, well, maybe just simplify and go for backdoor flush draws because you don't really care if it gets full right now. You're building it for more of a completely defensible on the next street, which totally makes sense as well. And someone who's listening to this who's like, I don't know what the hell either of you two ding-dongs are talking about.
Yeah.
Let's help that person, at least give them something that they can kind of sink their teeth into and not just be like, okay, well, I need a bet, but I have no freaking idea. Do I bet queen highs? Do I bet ace highs? Like,
yeah,
it can get kind of confusing when it comes to kind of prioritizing those bluff combos, especially when, on a board like this, like there's not a ton of like blocker value that we have in our favor necessarily.
Yes.
Yeah. So how do we help this person who's like, I don't know where to even start here?
Yeah. So I think we can make it real simple at the start. When we're looking at GTO strategies, getting the frequency right is the most important thing. If you get the frequency right, that means you're winning, in my opinion, at small stakes, and you're winning probably a lot. If you have the right pre-flop frequencies and like the right post-flop frequencies, even if your stuff is a little bit janky on the fringes, you're going to be dominating. Okay? Yeah. That's just the reality of the situation. And so first off, yes, we can get into this is the right blocker here. This creates the right balance strategy. Like that stuff is great. That stuff is fantastic. It can make you an incredibly hard opponent to play against, even by great players. It is fun to get into that. But it really is all about the frequencies. If you're feeling overwhelmed about what we're talking about, take this away. You want to have the right betting, checking frequencies. If you get there, it's incredibly, incredibly powerful, and you can figure out everything after that. So, with that said, we can get into it, right? Basically, what we are looking for is sort of strategic heuristics that create the ideal scenarios from the range that we can visualize. So in the moment, it's tough. It's tough to figure out this exactly. So a lot of this will be kind of like, you look at the solver afterwards and it's like, oh, on the 7-6-5 board, betting nines is better than betting tens because you have the backdoor straight draw, right? And you can handle getting check raised, and tens getting check raised is like not fun. Maybe if there's like more, a strategy that's not betting all over pairs. That is something that will come up, and you can learn these things, when we, decide to make bluffs and there's obvious blockers, right? Like an ace-8 suited is, an over, maybe a more appealing, flush draw to bet on that flop, because then you maybe have that in your jam range, or maybe it's more appealing to check. I'm actually not sure. It is useful to kind of learn these things out. And I think it becomes more obvious on turns and rivers, I think, when there's more texture that kind of defines ranges more concretely. Flop ranges, you're betting smaller. The ranges tend to be wider. It doesn't matter as much. But yeah, when we do get to the river, it can be like, oh, well, like... if we have queen, for some reason we decided to bluff the turn with it on an ace-king XX river, our queen blocks ace-queen, which is a hand we're, very worried about them calling us down with. Is that a good blocker? Like, yeah, I guess it can be, right? And I think those things can be pretty obvious. Maybe let's say we had queen-jack on a rainbow ace-king board and we got to the river after betting, right? Is that a good combination if we're worried about blocking out ace-jack and ace-queen? It's probably a great combo. And you may just start all of your bluffs with your best combos. And I think over time people, maybe we'll have to do a full episode on that where we go over like a lot of textures and things like that. But I think over time people can get comfortable with the idea of like, oh, these are really good blockers. These are obvious blockers. Another very common situation would be... there was like an obvious flush draw on the flop that someone would always continue with. We took a strong line with a hand that isn't a flush draw. It can be very good to bluff your non-flush draw combos, because then you're unblocking all of their flush draw combos. That's a very common situation. So yeah, there are those things. We can absolutely get into them. I think it's probably another full episode. But remember, frequency is your goal. If you can get the frequency, we can start to piece together the rest of the stuff pretty easily at that point. But focus on getting your frequency.
So I have to tie it back because I think it is really, really important, because frequency is going to be very related to the bet size. Mm-hmm. So how do we work this in? Because for most people, bet sizing is just this, again, kind of another black box of like, well, it's something I think is important, but I haven't gotten there quite yet. And I understand there are a lot of things to get to for a complete coherent strategy, but by the same token, how do we start wrapping the frequencies themselves that we're looking for in terms of our kind of value to bluff densities with the actual overall sizing?
Yeah, I think this is probably the last point we need to cover for this. And it is all about the size relative to the frequency. You know, if you imagine, let's take it back to preflop. Let's use our trick. So let's say, you know, the cutoff opens and you're in the button and you're like, okay, I wonder what size would make this person fold the most. And let's say like, well, I think they're going to be really uncomfortable playing against me out of position and they're going to play overly tight. So I'm just going to use a 5. I'm just going to go 5. He's going to go 2 big blinds for a min raise, and I'm going to go 5 big blinds. Now in this situation, you know, it gets a little murky. I think what is value? You know, is a king jack suited versus a min raise not value? It's maybe close to value, right? Maybe you can get called by enough worse hands, and with position, you know, value or whatever, it's maybe making money when you're called, and yeah. So if we just have that really tiny size, it's like, well, you just need lots of hands to 3-bet them with, right? That's it. You just need lots because their range is probably going to be a bit wider, and you're getting an amazing price on your bluff, and it's not even clear if something, you know, if it is a queen jack suited bluff, it's not that clear. And I think that applies directly to the flop. You know, it's like when you have a 10-8-2 board rainbow, and you bet 8-7 on it, and you get called, are you unhappy? You know, if you bet 30% on the flop, let's say. I mean, I think I would prefer people fold in that situation against me, but like, I know I'm going to like, you know, have some nice backdoor straight turn cards that I can play very easily. I can check back and show down a lot. You know, there's lots of textures that'll be easy to bluff catch on. I'm just never folding. You know, it's like, that's betting a 30% on that. We're just betting a wide range. We're getting called by a wide range. It's not too big a deal. That's a good feel for like a small bluff or a small bet size. And so if you have a lot of, you know, we always say, if you have a lot of hands you want to value bet, you lean smaller. And when you have a few hands, you tend to bet bigger. It changes a little bit on turns and rivers, but that's sort of the general heuristic that we help people use on flops, I would say, is just figure out how many hands you want to value bet. And imagine that same pre-flop scenario where you're like, this person's never going to fold when I 3-bet them. I'm going to 3-bet them to 15 big blinds from 2 big blinds, right?
Sure.
Well, how many hands do we want to do that with, right? What does our range look like? It's actually a really good question. Well, we're going to have aces, we're going to have kings, we're going to have queens, we're going to have jacks, we're going to have ace king, we're going to have ace queen. Jacks, maybe jacks is not even clear cut value because they're going to be pretty terrified, or they're going to be aware that, like, you know, you probably have some good hand when you go to 15 big blinds, right? Sure. Even if they're not a very good player and we're trying to exploit them or whatever. But let's just say for some reason we thought this is optimal. So, okay, say queens plus ace king we know is pure value. And then everything else is like iffy. Or let's say everything else we assume we lose money when we're called. Just make a really clear cut. For whatever reason, we just know anything besides queens plus ace king, we know we lose money when we're called. So what's the appropriate ratio? Well, interestingly enough, it's going to be we're actually shooting for about 50-50 bluffs, right? And the reason for this is basically like, you don't want to bluff as frequently when you're value betting a lot, because you know you're getting value and you can't find that many bluffs. And it's just, I'm not explaining it well, but when you know you're getting called, it's like the ranges are so wide that like your advantageous hands just kind of like maybe steer ahead a little bit. There are a couple, you know, EV points ahead. But when you bet large, basically the ideal ratio is just kind of just like, well, there's just this money in the pot and it's basically 50-50 if you're bluffing or value betting. Yep. And that's what you want to create for your opponent. Is you're basically like, you know, the most common situation for this would be like if you have the ace of diamond blocker on the river and you're considering like bluffing, it's like you can just overbet bluff shove. And it's like all you have to do is basically have about 50% bluffs, 50% value bets, and then how would they exploit you? They can't.
Sure.
And those pot odds and, you know, whatever, even if the pot is relatively small relative to your bet size, you know, that's kind of the classic overbet scenario, which is like you either have it or you don't. And it's 50-50. It's very close to 50-50. And that is basically, it's real simple. It's like, yeah, you have about, maybe it's like 48% bluffs or 45% bluffs, depending on the sizing or whatever you use. But yeah, it's basically 50-50. So taking those two extremes, you can kind of see where your range is going to sit. It's like on one hand, it's like you're kind of just having these middling value hands that are kind of bluffs, but not really. They have some playability of called, and there's just like a wide spectrum of hands. And on the other end, it's like we're betting big, and it's like it's either a pure bluff, like there's no chance you're going to win if called, or you have them just crushed, and when they call you, you're just celebrating.
Fair. So if you could simplify that into a simple rule, and I know you kind of simplified into two of them, but just one more time, just because I don't want it to get muddled in between examples. Say that one more time in terms of the bet sizing. So when do we have more bluffs? When do we have fewer bluffs? Which bet size goes with which?
Yeah, so big, we're looking for about a 50-50 bluff ratio, which is a high percentage of bluffs, although the quantity will go down because the amount of value bets you have will go down. And then when we're betting small, we want a relatively small percentage of bluffs because a lot of our hands are in that sort of middling value category that can have playability if called.
Perfect. Excellent. And is this kind of overall why we see the smaller bets on earlier straights, especially like flop C bets typically tend to be small, and then as we get closer to turns and rivers, they tend to be larger because things start to get more defined at that point. Is that kind of a fair way of simplifying that?
Yeah, I would say so. It's, a lot of times when we're the pre-flop raiser, on average, the board will come favorable for us because we just have stronger ranges and whatever. And because of that, we have a lot of hands we want to value bet. So we bet smaller on those earlier streets. And then later streets, our opponents will have generally folded out a lot of the weaker parts of the range. And it becomes more a game of like, am I bluffing or am I not? And a lot of times the callers' ranges are what we call, I'm going to blank on the name. They're capped. They're capped ranges, right? And so it's like when someone's really capped, the game is really, can I make you fold your hands or not? And that's the game we kind of end up playing on later streets more often. And they tend to get more, big bet, do you have it or do you not type of feeling.
Perfect. I think that's really good. I think these are some powerful heuristics that people can take away and just kind of put in their back pocket and really start formulating a strategy around, rather than just being incredibly confused about what size do we use, and then based upon that, how do we start formulating our ranges? How do we look at bluff to value density? I think this gives us some nice, helpful starting points. Do you have any kind of last minute thoughts as we wrap up here?
Yeah, there's one last example I think that can really help people is imagine you're getting shoved on pre-flop, like for a 5-bet. And, it's like your game is pretty tight. It's the usual small stakes game. You're basically trying to figure, and you have like queens or something, right? I think everyone can relate to that feeling and just being like, do they have the aces? Do they have the kings? Is that all they're doing this with?
Yeah.
And understand that from your opponent's perspective, if they were to say have a range of like, their 12 combinations of aces, or their 6 combinations of aces, 6 of kings for 12 combinations total, and they were just to add in ace 5 suited, have 4 combinations of that. Think how you basically can't play against that. It's like, well, I guess I figure out the exact average and just play perfectly balanced, and there's nothing I can do to exploit them. Whereas if they just shoved aces and kings, you could just always fold your queens.
Correct.
Right? And that is exactly the dynamic that we're scaling up and applying post-flop. Everyone, I think, can relate to that. When someone's shoving on you pre-flop, it's that large, do they have it, do they not, metagame. And then when it's small, it's like, yeah, we're just getting this middling average frequency, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that, using that trick of pre-flop, these situations that we all can be in, and I think everyone has a good, most poker players, even new ones, will quickly get a feel of pre-flop. Take that feeling and just try and see how you can directly apply it to get about the right frequencies post-flop. And hopefully that helps people.
I like it. I think I'm actually going to try using that. I've never thought about it like that because I tend to have a little bit more of a exploitative bend overall, and I tend not to be as focused on making sure that my bluff density is that perfect. but I think being able to eyeball it very quickly with this will be extremely helpful. So I'm going to try putting it to use in real time and then seeing how it feels. Because I think that's always one of the things, right? Whenever you get something like this, it's like, all right, well, I need to see how it feels in real time, and then I'll make a decision. Otherwise, I just kind of stick to things I already know, and again, I'm so exploitative focused. It's all I'm looking for.
I'll add one quick thing. One of the easiest ways I think would be in this scenario, we always say try and have some bluffs. See if you can figure out some hands you would be bluffing with, or if it feels like they're not. And those are the situations I think that this will help a lot, because like you said, it's all about in the moment. It's going to be difficult to count out combinations, but if in the moment you can say, it feels like I'm light on bluffs here. I'm looking for a bluff. There's no like logical hand I know I'd be bluffing here. So I got to go find some. Or like maybe you're in a situation where you're bluffing a lot and you want to maybe tamper it back and be like, ooh, I have a lot of hands here that are real light. Okay, maybe I should kind of figure out what maybe I want to over bluff a little bit, but like I want to keep it sane. That's something that comes up a lot. And actually we see hands with small stakes players over bluffing a lot. They're just in a spot where it's like, they just have so many weak hands, and then they even get called at small stakes. So it's a really good heuristic when you feel like you're in a situation where it's like you're either bluffing a lot or you feel like maybe you're having trouble finding any bluffs, and that can help you just say, okay, got to bring things back into balance a little bit.
Excellent. Well done. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing this, Chris. I hope people appreciate it. And if you have any thoughts on this, as you're listening to this, don't hesitate to jump in the Discord, redchippoker.com/Discord. Let us know what you're thinking about this. If there's any heuristics you use around these kind of things, bet sizing, bluff to value frequencies, let us know. Very, very interesting what you guys are doing too. So we will see you guys back shortly with another episode. Thank you so much, Chris, for hanging out. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you guys back shortly. Until then, good luck out there, and happy grinding.